All right, we got another five sheet here today with this CNN article. Let's start out with the way they write the headline. Pentagon anxiety rises as officers wait for Trump's next unpredictable move. All right, what is that title? I wrote that was an opinion. There's a little editorialization in there. Uh, the who's the one saying those moves are unpredictable? That's an arguable point. To what extent is this anxiety rises? These are matters of gradation. These aren't easily provable facts. So I think that's an opinion based headline. How'd I paraphrase it? Trump's unpredictable moves are causing officers in the Pentagon to have rising anxiety. Alright, what's the bias of this? It's CNN, establishment left. Let's go down, find the thesis here. Gonna zoom in a little bit. It's in the second paragraph. There is growing anxiety in the ranks. Boop boop. It's that paragraph there. So I put that one as a fact. It's a little more straightforward. The way I paraphrased it. With Trump's time left in office, military officers are anxious about actions such as an attack on Iran or using the military domestically with regards to the election. So, those are some pretty intense things, a little different from the headline there, right? Attacking Iran, using the military to decide the election, pretty intense moves. So, what evidence do they have supporting this? It's this paragraph right here. CNN has spoken to nearly a dozen currently serving officers, either in senior roles or with direct knowledge of how senior commanders feel right now. Not all are in the Pentagon. So there's some important qualifiers there. Less than 12 people, right? Nearly a dozen. So some number less than 12. Probably more than 6, but definitely less than 12. Uh, Not all of them are necessarily in senior roles. Uh, we can be sure that they're not all in senior roles. If they were all in senior roles, CNN would have said that. There's a chance that none of them are in senior roles the way this is worded, because they're all either in senior roles or with direct knowledge of how senior commanders feel right now. So you could read that as being, well, half the guys are in senior roles and the other half have direct knowledge. Or you could read that as saying, well, all of the guys are in the category of either in senior roles or having direct knowledge. Which category do all the guys fall into? They're all in the have direct knowledge. None of the guys we spoke to are in the senior roles category. The way they phrased it, that's definitely possible. Like, if you were to sue them for defamation or something, they worded it in such a way where they would not be lying if there was not a single senior officer they spoke to. So, they're not necessarily any senior officers in there, and there's not necessarily any of them in the Pentagon. It says not all are in the Pentagon. So we know there's at least one non Pentagon person, but they also don't say at least one is in the Pentagon. So it could be that all of them are not in the Pentagon. So keep those qualifiers in mind. That is a highly qualified description of their sources there. Alright, let's see how they outline this article. Starts out with this little prelude, like a narrative type thing. It was a low murmur just below the surface. We just don't know what he might do, or we don't know what he might do. Alright, so it starts out with that little prelude, setting the tone. Then it hits you with the thesis. Then it describes all that evidence with all the qualifiers. Then it goes on to talk about Trump making lists. What's he making lists of? Well, of people who cross him that he's gonna, get retribution on after. Oh no, these are just lists of people that he might fire sometime when he's still in office. Oh, okay. Not that big of a deal. And then next on the list there, they talk about that meeting that got a lot of hype in the last week or so with Sidney Powell at the Oval Office, and there was some talk about uh, using the military to get involved in the election, maybe seizing some voting machines. It's unclear exactly what was said in that office or in that meeting, but it was reported that there was some pretty contentious language, some pretty bold proposals being made. But that's not new news. That's not something that's come out in this article. They're giving that as context for this article. So they talk about that meeting. Boop, boop, boop. Uh, Next thing, they talk about how the military came out and gave a statement about how the military is not going to be involved in this, in determining the outcome of this election. And they said that's uncommon. So then they had a retired general, Tony Thomas, speaking out against Flynn. Keep in mind that's not a currently serving officer, which is which is really what this article is about, is the currently serving military feeling anxious about crazy Trump in his last 30 days. But here they have a retired general, disagreeing with Michael Flynn. And then they end up with this little discussion about how the military is going to follow legal orders. But if Trump starts giving illegal orders, that's going to cause, an issue. That's going to have to be decided somehow. All right, there we go. That's the outline. Let's look at the manipulation tactics used. Going through the list of named manipulation tactics here. Really, the core of this article was the fear confusion ramp. Remember, the way this one works is fear and confusion work well together, where if a reader is just a little bit fearful, that spikes their adrenaline, that makes them focus on the immediate threat, that makes them less suited to dissect complicated issues. So in that state of mind, it's easier to hit them with something overly complicated, something confusing, easier to ramp up their confusion level. So you can hit them with a little fear, then you hit them with a little confusion. Once you ramp up their confusion level, then it's easier to insert some more fear into there and then go back and forth, right? You increase one a little bit, then you increase the other one a little bit. Gets to the point where you're able to say something very fearful. A meteor is about to come down from the sky and hit you. That would be really scary if I were to believe it, but I normally wouldn't believe it. But once you're really whipped up, once you've gone through a few of this back and forth fear confusion ramp, your rational faculties aren't able to cut through the BS quite as well. So you're more able to believe that fear inducing bullshit. So let's see how they use in this article. Starting out at the very beginning here. It starts out with this narrative. It was a low murmur just below the surface. We don't know what he might do. So it starts out with these like officers in the Pentagon acting all scared, like they're afraid of the president because he's some crazy person. So, if that was actually happening, that would be a pretty scary situation. Um, and, but they don't explain it. And it's also a little confusing as to why this is happening because it's not explained all too clearly why these guys are walking around like they're afraid of their boss or whatever. Uh, but that's mostly a fear thing in that first paragraph. And then they hit this big fear bomb with we're going to invade Iran. We're going to use the military to overthrow the election. So, boom, holy shit. And then we go into this procedural stuff. Uh, well, it's unusual for them to publicly say this. Alright, and then we have all these technical qualifications. And then they're not allowed to speak, but opinions are divided. But some say this only fuels the fire, they don't direct. It's like, what? Whatever. A bunch of, kind of confusing, unnecessary little details. Doesn't add much of the substance. It's just, getting you lost in the weeds. And then the next heading, making lists. Like, oh my god, he's going to be coming for us. He's making lists of his enemies. That's hitting you with the fear again. But if you still have your cognitive faculties on, you can read through this carefully. The list he's talking about is not anything scary. It's just lists of people that he might be firing before he leaves. He's been firing a bunch of people at the Pentagon. He's had a lot of disagreements about the way military's been, conducting itself. They lied to him about how many troops were in Syria. This has been an ongoing thing in his administration. Um, then, yeah, then it goes back into, after the list thing, it goes into the Sidney Powell thing, which is more fear. So, it goes back and forth. But that fear confusion ramp is really the core tactic. That's the main deceitful tactic used in this article, where they go back and forth between needless details and overhyped fear mongering to try to make each one more effective by using the other. All right, wrapping this up here. My final thought on this piece, I'm really suspicious about the factual sourcing for this article. The actual, they spend a lot of time talking about just old news, about that Oval Office meeting, about Michael Flynn's comments on Newsmax, about, military saying they would not be involved in the election. A lot of old news. The one piece of new news they have is that they spoke to these nearly dozen guys with all those qualifiers. So that's the actual reporting they're doing. It's all from that paragraph. And it's highly dubious. So it could be based on a handful of low-level military people anywhere in the country. That's what they're saying in that paragraph. You could find a handful of those type of people saying that Trump is doing great, that he's doing terribly, or anywhere in between. So I really don't find this to be that newsworthy of an article. This is the same, just unnamed sources say X. It means just about nothing. And if this is the type of sourcing that is acceptable to run a big news article on, then certainly it would have been okay to run the Hunter Biden story that had, the laptop story that had much better sourcing. A lot of the election election irregularities have stronger evidence than we're given in this one paragraph here. So keep in mind, the strongest piece of evidence they have for this whole article is a handful of unnamed sources with a lot of qualifiers on them. And the main tactic they're using to sell this article is that fear confusion ramp. Alright, let me know if you guys see anything else. See you on the next one.